A single letter, yet 2 signatures. What secrets could it hide? Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Share in the mystery. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. On Tuesday morning, the mail tried to get clever. I was at my desk in the office, where the trick is to look busy without wearing out the furniture. The October sun had found the strip of window that Wolfe will allow to be unshaded before noon, and it was busy warming the corner of my typewriter like we were raising an orphaned Remington. The doorbell had already been exercised twice, once by a man who thought we were the downstairs tailor, and once by a florist who needed directions to an address across the street. If you think this is unusual for West 35th, you don't know West 35th. Fritz had sent up coffee, which is the nearest he gets to sin before lunch. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids doing his impersonation of a man who tolerates sunlight. If Theodore coughed in the wrong tone, Wolfe would return early in a mood that took 1,000 calories to feed. We were at peace. So, of course, the doorbell went off again with the kind of insistence that says somebody has a schedule that isn't Wolfe's. I opened to a young woman in courier black, the kind of uniform designed by an optimist who thinks zippers are character. She had a square leather case handcuffed to her wrist. That detail told me we were headed for trouble. In my experience, anything that arrives attached to a stranger's skeleton is either subpoena, ransom, or a new reason for Wolfe to dislike people. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, like she didn't want the answer to be no. "On my more regrettable days," I told her. "You've brought us a fashion statement." She held up her wrist. "Security. I have a hand delivery for Mr. Nero Wolfe. I was told to get a signed receipt from you and to wait for a reply if there is one." If there is one. People love to load a little dynamite into a sentence and pass it across the counter like it's a sugar cube. "He's indisposed until 11, I said. "I'm not. I'll sign." She consulted the kind of rules that live in a pocket. Recipient only. The sender paid for direct handoff. Of course he did. I stepped aside. "Parking's free. Come in." In the office, she waited while I called up to the plant rooms and stated that the earth had moved. Wolfe grunted, which is his way of saying civilization will endure a brief interruption. Theodore would keep the orchids from despair while he was absent. A minute later, Wolfe came in, filling the doorway with an amount of person that made the courier stand straighter. He gave her the sort of nod he gives to competent servants and incompetent dukes. "You have something for me," he said. She produced a small steel key from a second pocket, opened the case, and took out a long envelope the color of old bone. On the front, our address was typed by someone who had trained their machine to march in step. The flap was sealed with red wax that had been impressed by a ring. She handed it over with the solemnity of a nurse presenting a newborn to a monarch. "Receipt," she said, and we both signed. She checked the ink like it was a blood type, recuffed the case, and left. If I ever need someone to deliver me out of a burning building, I'll see if she's available. Wolfe sniffed the envelope. "You may think that's theatrical, but a man who pays for the finest food on earth to be coaxed into flavor by a genius of a chef isn't going to stop short of using his nose on a letter that looks like it voted for Grover Cleveland." He carried it to his desk, sat, used a paper knife with a horn handle, and slid out a single sheet of cream paper thick enough to serve as body armor in certain neighborhoods. He read. His brows made a brief acquaintance with each other and then parted, like gentlemen who have found reason to be cordial. He passed the sheet to me. The letter began without preamble, which I appreciated. It said, "Mr. Wolfe, you will think this foolish, and you will be wrong. I require your judgment on a matter that appears to be petty and is not. If you consent, send word by the bearer, and I will call at 1 o'clock with a retainer and the articles in question. Respectfully, Charlotte Vale." Charlotte Vale. I looked at it, then at him, and then back at it. The two signatures weren't photocopies. They weren't even twins separated at the fountain pen. They were, if this makes sense, two different ways of being the same name. The first had the easy swoop of a woman who had signed checks all her life. The second had the deliberate, practiced exactness of a woman signing something that would be checked against a standard. The strokes were similar enough to make a forger proud and different enough to give a notary insomnia. "Cute," I said. "2 Charlottes for the price of one." "Pfui," Wolfe said, which is what he says when he agrees with me and detests the fact. He tapped the letter with a forefinger like a judge adjusting a verdict. "What do you make of it?" "She wants to know which of her is real," I said, "or which will be believed. Or she's telling us she's been doubled." He closed his eyes. Wolfe seldom plays guessing games, but when he does, he expects the other player to have fun quietly. "You see only the surface," he said. "So do I, as yet. But even the surface is interesting. She presumes I will think it foolish. She declines to say more in writing. The bearer is instructed to wait for a reply. She names an hour, 1 o'clock, that suits neither my luncheon nor my conscience." He opened his eyes, which is the closest he gets to a drum roll. "We shall see her at 1. "Why?" I asked. That wasn't insolence. Wolfe often enjoys an audience for his reasons, and if the audience is me, he can rehearse. He shifted a fraction in his chair. "Because whoever wrote this expects me to refuse," he said, "and I dislike giving strangers the satisfaction of being right about my habits." "Add it to the list," I told him. "I'll tell Fritz to move the omelette." "If you tell Fritz to move the omelette," Wolfe said, "you will be the one he moves." He looked again at the paper. "Charlotte Vale," he murmured. "The name's familiar." "Social pages," I suggested. "There was a Vale who endowed a fellowship at the Manhattan School of Music last year. The philanthropist type. If this is her, she can afford our rates and a hobby." "Pff." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Do not bother Saul yet." "You expect we will need him?" "I expect that people who double themselves bring quadruple annoyance." He leaned back. "Archie, have the office presentable at 1. Do not be colorful. I'm always colorful when warned not to be. But I tidied the desk, suppressed the urge to arrange the paperweight into a jaunty angle, and spent an hour making calls that didn't pick up. At 12:40, Fritz summoned me to the dining room to say that the omelette had not been moved, so I compromised with a biscuit and an expression of self-denial. At 5 of 1, I was back at my post when the doorbell did its chorus again. She didn't need introduction, wouldn't have liked one. Charlotte Vale was the sort of woman who knows what a room owes her and never has to send an invoice. 50, or the kind of 50 you get when your grandmother's lawyer loved you. Gray hair cut to a line that said she had fired a stylist once for presumption. She wore navy and pearls, and the look of a person who has met committees and beaten them on points. With her was a man in his 30s in a suit that had been expensive last year. Lean, watchful, with a face that saved its expressions like a banker saves an umbrella. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, in a voice that had been trained to carry to the back row without insult. "Thank you for indulging me." Wolfe inclined his head the exact amount that an indulgence weighs. "Mrs. Vale." "Miss," she corrected. "Miss Vale," he said, with no evidence of having been wrong. She sat where I directed and didn't fuss with the chair. The man remained standing until I gave him a nod that suggested he sit or grow roots. He sat. I got names. The man was Owen Hart, Miss Vale's chief of staff at the Vale Foundation, which is a title you can wear to either a ribbon cutting or a knife fight, depending on the neighborhood. Wolfe didn't offer them beer. This was not a beer occasion. He folded his hands over his middle and looked at her like he was wondering if she might possibly be tolerable. "You sent me a letter," he said, "with 2 signatures." I did. She reached into her bag and produced a flat leather folio, which is what happens when an envelope goes to finishing school. From it, she took 2 documents in transparent sleeves and laid them on my desk. I brought them to Wolfe. They were, at a glance, twins. Each was a 2-page letter on Vale Foundation letterhead, addressed not to Wolfe, but to someone named Stephen Attridge, a name that rang a small bell somewhere near City Hall in my memory. The first letter instructed Mr. Attridge to release funds, 7 figures worth if you're counting, toward a program in partnership with a private research institute. The second letter instructed Mr. Attridge to suspend the same funds indefinitely pending an internal review. Both letters were dated the same day. Both were signed Charlotte Vale. The signatures matched the pair on the note we'd received. One flowing, one controlled. "If you're asking me which is genuine," Wolfe said, "I'm not a handwriting expert." "I'm not asking for a graphologist," she said. "I have 3 of those already, and they disagree, which is what specialists do when they're healthy. I am asking for judgment. Which of these expresses my intent?" "That is a question for you," Wolfe said. She shook her head once. "If it were, I would not be here." She turned to me with a small smile that didn't require my opinion. "Mr. Goodwin, you will forgive me for being elliptical. The Foundation is under unusual pressure. There are competing claims to our money and to our name. Someone is using my authority to steer the ship. I intend to remain captain, but I'm not entirely sure whether I gave the order I think I gave." "That's a new one," I said. "Amnesia with a legal department." "Not amnesia," she said. "Confusion, curated, induced, and placed. The last month has been crowded. I've been presented with drafts and corrections and summaries at velocity. I review, I sign, I review. Somewhere in that, I authorized one of these instructions and repudiated the other. Both have counter-signatures, and both have a notary seal. One is a betrayal wearing my face. The other is mine wearing a stranger's. "Why us?" Wolfe asked. He wasn't making conversation. "Because you are less interested in my philanthropy than in my contradictions," she said. "Because you'll sit in that chair and demand the world come to you. And because Mr. Attridge," she flicked the name like it was a crumb, "has been advised to act on one letter at close of business today. If he chooses wrong, the result will be public and irreversible." Owen Hart spoke for the first time. His voice was a little dry, like it had been stored near a radiator. "Miss Vale's position on the program is consistent but under attack. External parties would like her to look erratic. Internally—" He cut that off and looked at his hands. "Internally, there are tensions." "Ah." Wolfe's lids drooped. He looked, for a moment, asleep. "That's when you should worry. You have brought the articles in question. Are there more?" "Yes," she said, and from the folio came 4 additional items: briefing memos, an email printout with a chain that could have moored a ship, and a small, unassuming card. "That," she said, indicating the card, "was slipped under my apartment door 3 nights ago. I live at the Pierre. The corridors are not public thoroughfares. I picked up the card. It was blank except for a sentence printed by a machine that had learned English from a bored bureaucrat. Choose the second signature." No signature, no letterhead, no date. Just a suggestion that had made a midnight visit to a woman with guards and locks. Wolfe sighed. He doesn't like the world when it grows too modern around him. "You are being shepherded," he said. "This is crude work and therefore dangerous." "I agree," Miss Vale said. "So I am here." Wolfe looked at the clock, then at me. "Theodore has the orchids. Fritz has lunch. The universe has claims." Nevertheless, he turned back to Miss Vale. "I will take the case. My fee is $25,000 as a retainer, refundable if I dismiss you. I will require the names of everyone with authority over your papers for the last 6 months, and I will require Mr. Attridge to delay his action until tomorrow morning." "You will get the names," she said, "and Stephen will wait if I tell him to. He is formally independent, but not rebellious." "Good," Wolfe said. "Do not communicate with anyone about your visit here except Mr. Hart, whom you will bind to silence under threat of unemployment and contempt." Hart's jaw tightened. "You'll have it," he said. I gathered the papers. Wolfe reached for the card that had recommended the second signature and slid it under his blotter as if it might bite. He looked at Miss Vale again. "One more question. Why 2 signatures, your 2 hands, on the letter you sent me?" She smiled briefly, the way a fencer acknowledges a touch. "To see if you would notice and care," she said. "If you did not, I would go elsewhere." I need a man who is irritated by the wrong pen stroke. Wolfe's mouth softened a fraction. "Then you have chosen well," he said. "Archie, you will accompany Miss Vale and Mr. Hart downstairs. When you return, call Mr. Attridge and inform him that a delay is necessary. If he protests, invite him to be reasonable." "Then you will begin a list." "What list?" I asked. "The list of hands," he said. "Anyone who touched Miss Vale's words before they reached her. We will see which hand learned to write like hers." Miss Vale rose. She didn't offer her hand, and Wolfe didn't rise, which made it a well-matched etiquette contest. At the door, she turned back. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "the last person who tried to steer me collided with a reef. I prefer to avoid wreckage this time." Wolfe inclined his head. "So do I," said. "Wrecks are untidy." I got them to the sidewalk in a black town car with a driver who had the expression of a man who has seen better sidewalks. When I came back up, Wolfe was staring at the little card like it was a moth that refused to find the window. He didn't look up. "Archie," he said, "someone is trespassing. Not upon our property, upon the property of mind. They have moved a word and left a crumb." "Which word?" I asked. He tapped the blotter. "Second," he said. "They wanted her to choose the second signature." "On which document does the second signature appear?" "The suspension order," I said. "You think they're telling her to freeze the funds?" "No," Wolfe said, finally raising his eyes. "I think they're telling us they believe we can count." "Sometimes I can," I said. "Sometimes I even get paid for it." "Call Mr. Attridge," Wolfe told me, "and then find out how many people have keys to Miss Vale's corridor at the Pierre." "Keys," I said. "You think this started at her door?" "No," he said, closing his eyes again. "It started wherever her certainty was weakened enough to accept a familiar letter with a foreign heart. But the door will tell us how hard they pushed." He settled back. "Go." So I went. And while I dialed, I decided the mail hadn't tried to get clever. It had succeeded. If you want to know whether civilization still has a chance, listen to the way a finance man answers his phone. Stephen Attridge took my call on the second ring and sounded like a man who times his chewing. I told him Nero Wolfe requested a brief delay on acting on either instruction regarding the program in question until tomorrow morning. I didn't call it an order. I called it a professional preference with consequences. "Miss Vale has authority," he said, courteous the way a doorman is to cab doors. "If she directs a delay, I comply. If she does not, I execute the last clear instruction in my possession." "Then you're in luck," I said. "She directs a delay." A pause, just long enough for him to look up over his glasses at nothing. "Very well," he said. "But I would appreciate clarity by 10 a.m. tomorrow." "You'll get clarity," I told him. "You may not like the color." I logged it, gave Wolfe the nod from the doorway, and got my hat. Wolfe had his forearms nested, eyes closed, weighing the word second in the card like it was hiding a cousin. He didn't open his eyes when he said, "The Pierre first." I went out thinking I might add the Pierre to the list of Manhattan addresses that don't need street numbers. The doorman recognized Miss Vale's name without being impressed into a new religion. I presented a card and a tone that says, "I'm here to prevent embarrassment," and he telephoned up. Miss Vale's chief of staff, Mr. Hart, had left 15 minutes earlier, but building security would be happy to assist. Happy arrived in the form of a man named Kudahi with a square chin and a tie with more geometry than mercy. We sat in a small back office that had the smell all security offices have: coffee and printer ink and the memory of arguments. "You're asking who has access to Corridor 12. Floor 22, he said, reading my notes upside down because that's what they teach. We don't hand out master keys with the ice buckets. "I'm delighted," I said. 3 nights ago, a card was slipped under Miss Vale's door. I'd like to know who could stroll that corridor and how much they leave behind when they do. He drummed a knuckle. Staff who can be on that floor after 10 p.m. Housekeeping second shift, 1 maid and 1 floor supervisor. Engineering on call, 1. Security patrol, 1. Night manager can access all floors. Private butlers employed by certain tenants, 2 on 22, one of whom services Miss Vale's neighbor, and the guests themselves, of course. Elevator access is controlled, but service stairs connect all floors. Cameras. Lobby and elevators, yes. Corridors, number. That's a legal and aesthetic decision. People in $5,000 robes do not enjoy being on candid camera. Key logs? He brightened slightly. Kudahi liked a system. Electronic passes record door events, but Miss Vale's apartment is old school. She prefers a traditional lock, refurbished, so we rely on the butler's set and the front desk key log. So if someone used an old-fashioned piece of metal at 3 in the morning, you'd know only if you saw them. Not unless they used our desk key. That is checked out under name and time. It was not. "Then what do you have?" I asked. He produced a clipboard. Someone had been here before me. "Night of the 10th, he said. Housekeeper shift ended at 11:40. Patrol walked the corridor at 12:15, 2:15, 4:15. The butler for 22B came up at 11 and again at 7 a.m. The floor supervisor did a final check at 11:50. No complaints, no noise calls. Any deliveries? After 10? No, the butler for 22B, I said. Name? Renee. No surname on this sheet. He's contracted through the tenant. Why? Because if I wanted to slip a calling card under a door without starring in your elevator footage, I would come up as someone expected. I tapped the times. 11 fits. 7 a.m. is late for Menace. Kudahi spread his hands. Even if Renee walked by, he can't access Miss Vale's door. He doesn't need to? The card was under the door, not inside it. You need the corridor, not the apartment. I pocketed the timing and stood. Do me one more favor. Let your patrolman who walked at 2:15 know that a private detective may call with questions. If he remembers anyone loitering, names will make me affectionate. Back on 5th Avenue, the air had that cool, pebbled bite that reminds men in coats that they are mammals. I put in a call to Saul Panzer and left him a short message. No color, just the thread. Find Renee, the tenant's butler on 22B, and the tenant who employs him. Learn whether he has a habit of midnights. If Saul were any better at his job, I'd lose mine. Next stop, the Vale Foundation. Their offices were in Midtown in a building that had polished its brass so often it had become philosophical about its reflection. A receptionist with eyelashes that could dust a mantle asked me whether I had an appointment. I told her I had a personality. It got me Owen Hart. Hart came out looking like a man who had been told to expect a fire alarm. He took me into a glass box, judged to be a conference room by the presence of chairs and a view of men in ties. I should warn you, he said mildly. We are at low boil. Then don't spill, I said. Wolfe wants the list of hands. Everyone who manages Miss Vale's paper between thought and signature for the last 6 months. He had anticipated that. He passed me a sheet dense enough to threaten my posture. Executive team members with drafting privileges, legal counsel, internal and external. Grants compliance, Mr. Attridge's finance office, 2 administrative assistants, 3 program directors who have sometimes prepared letters for Miss Vale's signature. And the notary rotation. We use 3 names, titles, and phone numbers, I said, scanning. And the assistant's assistants. You'll find them on page 2. He looked like the list offended him personally. You should also know there's been increased activity. Miss Vale's schedule was crowded. Memos were funneled at her faster than usual. By whom? I asked. By necessity, they'll say. We have 2 major initiatives and a board meeting in 2 weeks. But Mr. Samarco, our head of programs, is ambitious and not patient, and our external counsel, Eliza Brogan, has been unusually present. Unusually present is a useful phrase, I said. Present as in helpful, or present as in installed. Hart allowed a ghost of a smile. Both. She comes with a point of view. The institute in question, if the release of funds proceeds, would partner through a shell, she recommended. That will do for motive until better comes along. I slid the 2 contested letters out of my folder. Who prepared these drafts? Hart took them, scanned, and handed them back with a finger resting on the lower margin where the small print lives in darkness. Formatting tag at the footer says LDN-PRG-2, he said. That's internal. It means Program Team, Template 2, from London office days. But this header is our New York letterhead. Whoever drafted used an old template. I can tell you who has that template. Samarco, his coordinator, and, if she imported it, Miss Brogan. Good, I said. Now 4. Dessert. The notary's seal. He leaned in. The seal on both was clean, the sort of circle that believes in its own geometry. Marla Quinn, he said. She rotates Thursdays. She notarized 3 documents that day, 2 contradictory instructions notarized on the same day by the same person, I said. Did she notice? She's careful, he said. If both came to her with Miss Vale and were signed in sequence, she would have asked a question. Then either she didn't see both, or she did and was discouraged from curiosity. I pocketed the list, which now weighed what a week of poor sleep weighs. I want Miss Quinn, and Samarco, and Brogan, and the assistants. If anyone asks, tell them I'm here to measure chairs. Hart stood. You believe this is internal? I believe the card under the door was theatre, I said, and the play was written somewhere with your stationery. At the door he hesitated. Mr. Goodwin, he said. Miss Vale trusts very few people. If this goes wrong? If this goes wrong, I said, it will be because someone else miscounted, not because we didn't. Hold your boil on the sidewalk, I took stock. A butler named Renee, a notary named Quinn, a program head named Samarco, counsel named Brogan, finance steady as a metronome, and a template tag that had wandered across oceans. I called Wolfe from a payphone I keep alive out of principle and gave him the list, the tag, and the fact that Attridge would wait. He listened. When he spoke, he sounded pleased the way a cat is when geometry brings a bird to the sill. The notary first, he said, then the ambitious man, then the lawyer, in that order. And Archie, stop by a stationer. Buy a sheet of Vale Foundation paper from the receptionist with eyelashes. Souvenir. Control, he said. I want to feel its weight in my hand while I think. He hung up. I looked at the city's face and decided it wasn't lying any less than usual. Then I turned downtown to find a woman who had put her seal on somebody's second thought. Notaries are supposed to be human versions of padlocks, impartial, incorruptible, and more interested in form than feeling. If you've ever met a real notary, you know that's about as reliable as a promise from a used car lot. Marla Quinn worked in an office suite on Lexington that had been rented by a law firm before law firms discovered glass walls. The brass plaque on the door announced 3 small-time attorneys who did tax work for big-timers, and Marla was their resident witness of truth. She was 40, trim, and had the look of someone who likes her signature better than her reflection. She didn't look surprised to see me. I gave her the Wolfe introduction and showed her the photocopies of the 2 Vale letters. Her eyebrows met in the middle for a consultation. "Yes, those are mine. I notarized them both," I asked. "Yes, they were, presented to me within 10 minutes of each other. Miss Vale came in with her aide, Mr. Hart, I believe, and signed them at my desk. I attached the seal. You didn't think it unusual that one letter told finance to release 7 figures and the other told finance to freeze them?" She frowned. "My responsibility is to witness a signature, not to interpret policy." Miss Vale appeared calm. She signed both, carefully, and confirmed them verbally. She said, "This is correct." Twice. "Did she say it like she meant it?" Marla paused. "The second time. Slower, as though she was repeating something she had memorized. I remember because her aide, Hart, shifted in his chair. That was worth underlining." "Did anyone else speak?" "No. Hart carried the papers, laid them down, retrieved them. He is efficient." "Would you say she looked distracted, pressured, confused?" "Distracted," she admitted. Her eyes weren't on me. They were on the papers. And she asked for a glass of water, which was unusual. I fetched it. When I returned, she was waiting with the pen poised. I thanked her and left before she decided to charge for hourly philosophy. Outside, I called Wolfe. He grunted as soon as I told him Hart had been in the room when both contradictory letters were notarized. As I suspected. He had his hand on them. Then he's a suspect? He is a necessity. That is not the same as guilt. He had opportunity, proximity, and motive by proxy. But if he is the lever, who applies the force? Brogan, the external counsel, I suggested. She recommended the Institute. Perhaps. But the butler intrigues me more. "Did you reach Panzer?" "Saul's on Renee's trail." He'll report. Good. Now attend to Samarco. The Vale Foundation's program head, Albert Samarco, had an office full of binders, color-coded like a patriot. He was in his 40s, wiry, with a thin mustache that made him look like a man forever about to explain a wine list. He shook my hand, with fingers that might have been carved out of pencils. "You're investigating Miss Vale's letters," he said at once and gestured me into a chair. "Good. Someone should. They've created paralysis. Half the staff doesn't know whether to push forward or retreat." "You prepared one of the drafts?" He lifted his chin. "I prepared both. The first was correct. The release? The second was forced on her. She asked me to prepare a draft of suspension, then returned an hour later with it signed. I was stunned. Who told her to suspend?" "Brogan," he said with contempt thinly veiled as civility. "Eliza whispered in her ear that we needed compliance review. Miss Vale is impressionable when legal risk is invoked. She doesn't want scandal. Brogan plays on that. Why would Brogan want delay?" Samarco leaned closer. "Because another institute, rival to ours, is her client. Delay hurts us, helps them. Don't think I don't know it. She has her hands in both jars." He was ambitious, but ambition doesn't always equal sabotage. His eyes shone like a man fighting for turf, not like one writing anonymous cards. Still, the old template, the duplication of letters. His team touched the documents. "Where was Hart during this?" I asked. "Everywhere. He shuttles between her office and ours. He pretends neutrality, but he controls the calendar. If she sees a draft, it's because he schedules it. He is the gatekeeper that made Hart a better chess piece than suspect, a rook that blocks until it topples." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had the card spread on his blotter beside the stationery sample I'd lifted from the Vale receptionist. He ran his fingertip along the grain of the paper as though stroking an argument. "Quinn observed hesitation," he said when I reported. "Samarco claims Brogan instigated the second letter. Hart was present in both. The butler's status is pending. What do you conclude?" That Charlotte Vale was led by the nose into contradicting herself, with Hart holding the leash, I said. But whether he was following Brogan's command or his own ambition is open. Reasonable, Wolfe conceded, but not complete. Whoever slipped the card under her door had knowledge of which letter bore the second signature. That suggests someone close to the sequence? Quinn, I offered. Unlikely. She is banal. She obeys function. But Hart. He delivered the papers, controlled the order. He could whisper in her ear as she signed, and later reinforce the suggestion with a card. So we drag Hart in? Not yet. First Panzer will tell us about Renee. If Renee was conduit, Hart had courier. If not, the circle contracts. Wolfe leaned back, eyelids half closed. We must also learn what program is contested and why it is worth sabotage. I reminded him it involved millions and a partnership with a research institute. Wolfe made a face that suggested he preferred millions in truffles. The phone rang. It was Saul. He had Renee's file, a Frenchman, late 20s in New York, 3 years, employed by a Vale neighbor, Mrs. Tremaine, widow, fond of soirée. Renee was seen leaving the 22nd floor at 11:15 the night the card appeared. Witness, a doorman, reliable. Renee said he was fetching ice, but he lingered by Miss Vale's door long enough to suggest curiosity. Not coincidence, Wolfe muttered after I relayed. Not accident. We must know who paid him to be curious. That meant a quiet chat with Renee. I said as much. Wolfe allowed it, with one condition. No violence, Archie. Words. If he resists, Panzer may apply pressure later. I got my coat. Wolfe shut his eyes again, fingers interlaced. Archie, he said, remember this. When a woman signs 2 letters in one breath, the true enemy is the silence between them. That was his way of saying, keep my eyes open. I went out into the darkening evening where butlers, lawyers, and aides all wanted to be authors of the same signature. Renee had the kind of apartment that makes you wonder how much loyalty a widow's butler earns in a city with high rents. It was a modest walk-up in Hell's Kitchen, the sort of place where wallpaper is never new and neighbors mind each other's cooking smells. I had Saul pass me the address and decided not to wait for reinforcements. A butler who loiters outside his employer's neighbor's door at midnight usually doesn't have a platoon behind him. When Renee opened the door, he looked like a man who had expected either a landlady or a debt collector, but not a detective with questions. He was slim, smooth, with hair combed back so tightly it looked like it had been shellacked. He was polite in the way Europeans are when they think it gives them camouflage. Mr. Goodwin, he said, with only a trace of accent. He must have checked me out already. Panzer leaves fingerprints on the world in the form of nervous suspects. I'd like to talk, I told him. We can do it in your apartment, or downstairs on the curb, or in a police station where the chairs are harder. Choose your scenery. He stepped aside. The room was clean, neat, and nearly bare, except for a photograph of a middle-aged woman on the dresser, likely Madame Tremaine, and a small liquor cart that looked touched more by cloth than by hand. I sat. He didn't. You were seen outside Miss Vale's door the other night. 11:15, long enough to make friends with her doormat. He spread his hands. I was fetching ice from the machine. The corridor is narrow. Perhaps I stood a moment. I did not enter her apartment. No one says you did. But someone slid a card under her door that night, and you were in position. A blank card with an instruction. Choose the second signature. Do you recognize that? His eyes flicked once. It was quick, but it wasn't subtle. I know nothing of cards. Try again, I said. The problem with butlers is people assume you're invisible. You're not. You were seen. If I bring in the police, they'll ask who pays you, and if they find cash that didn't come from Madame Tremaine's account, you'll be explaining in longer sentences. He licked his lips. I was asked to deliver something discreetly. I did not know its contents. A man approached me 2 nights before. He said it was a simple task. Describe him. He was tall, American, wore glasses with dark frames, expensive coat. He knew my name. He offered me $200 to slip an envelope under Miss Vale's door. He said it contained a note she must see privately. Name. He did not give it, but he said he worked with Miss Vale, that it was necessary to protect her. That was the kind of line that smells like perfume and poison mixed. So you slipped it. Did you see Miss Vale? No, I left it and went back to my duties. I leaned back. You're going to stay available. You'll give me a call if this man with dark frames appears again, because if you don't, you'll discover just how curious the NYPD can be about side incomes. Renee nodded quickly, too eager to be innocent. I left him with a card of mine and the warning that Saul Panzer would check in if I didn't hear anything. Out on the sidewalk, I called Wolfe with the report. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "Hart, you're sure? He fits." The aide, efficient, watchful, in dark frames, moving between Miss Vale and every document. He has both motive and opportunity. The butler was merely instrument. Then why not confront Hart now? Because we must know what he gains. Does he act for himself or as proxy? Does he wish the funds released or suspended? The card implies the latter, but he could be double-playing. Bring me Brogan. It was after 7 when I tracked Eliza Brogan to a restaurant near Columbus Circle where lawyers go to inflate their expenses. She was sharp, angular, with the kind of haircut that costs as much as rent and announces you're billing by the hour, even when you're drinking water. I caught her between dessert and brandy by introducing myself and showing credentials Wolfe had printed on heavy stock. She didn't invite me to sit, but I sat anyway. You've been advising Miss Vale, I said, particularly on the Institute program. That's my job, she said crisply. Ensuring compliance, protecting liability. If you're implying otherwise, you should watch your phrasing. I'm implying she signed 2 contradictory letters under your watch. Release and suspend. Which one did you recommend? The suspension, she said, without blinking. The due diligence was incomplete. If funds were released and scandal followed, Miss Vale would be exposed. And if they're frozen, then she looks cautious, prudent. No one condemns prudence unless it was engineered to stall a partnership. Her lips twitched. Samarco told you that, didn't he? He's desperate. He wants his program greenlit, no matter the risk. You're saying he pushed her into signing the release, then you countered with the suspension. I didn't push, I advised. She asked me directly what exposure she faced. I told her. She acted. That's all. The waiter hovered, and she dismissed him with a flick. Tell Mr. Wolfe, she added, that he should be wary of Samarco's narrative. Ambition lies. I don't. It was a clean performance, but the kind too clean to be trusted. I left her with a check she pretended not to see and headed back to the brownstone. Wolfe was at his desk, a beer within reach, the card still under his blotter. She admits recommending suspension, I reported. Calls it prudence. Samarco blames her. Hart remains in the middle, everywhere at once. The butler confessed to slipping the card for a man in dark frames. It fits Hart like a glove. Wolfe shut his eyes, breathing deep. The pieces arrange. But not yet the pattern. Someone is contriving to fracture Miss Vale's authority, to make her appear erratic. That is the goal. Whether the funds are released or frozen is secondary. The essential is her discredit. I sat. And who profits if she looks erratic? Ah, Wolfe said, opening his eyes at last. That is tomorrow's question. Tonight you will telephone Mr. Attridge and confirm his delay. And then you will call Miss Vale and tell her that I must see her in this office with Hart, Samarco, and Brogan together. The fissures will widen when pressed. I looked at him. You're calling the circle in early. Yes, they are already circling themselves. Better they circle me. It was set. Tomorrow the office would be disturbed again, this time by 3 people with motives and 1 client with 2 signatures. Wolfe had his stage. All that remained was to see who cracked when he asked the wrong question the right way. The following morning the brownstone didn't creak. It braced itself. Fritz had outdone himself at breakfast. Scones, eggs, sausages, and Wolfe treated them with a solemnity priests reserve for relics. He chewed slowly, considering each bite, while I tried not to think about the fact that in 2 hours we were going to have 3 suspects and 1 nervous client in the office. Wolfe didn't discuss strategy. He never does before curtain. He expects me to play the usher while he directs the symphony. At 11 sharp, the doorbell set off its sermon. I opened to find Charlotte Vale and Owen Hart together, followed within minutes by Albert Samarco and Eliza Brogan arriving separately. They managed not to collide in the hall, but their eyes clashed like cymbals. I ushered them in one by one, arranging the chairs with Wolfe's sense of geometry. Client nearest his desk, aide at her shoulder, program head and lawyer opposite each other like chess bishops. Wolfe, behind the desk, loomed like an unmoving mountain. He didn't waste time. "Miss Vale," he said, "I have reviewed the documents, the testimonies, and the circumstances of your dual instructions. I now require candor from all parties." Charlotte Vale inclined her head. She looked rested but taut, like a violin string waiting for a bow. Hart folded his hands. Brogan crossed her legs with the confidence of someone who bills by the minute. Samarco perched forward, already itching for his turn. Wolfe pointed a finger, not at a person, but at the air. 2 contradictory letters were signed by you, Miss Vale, within minutes. Both bore authentic signatures, both notarized. That paradox cannot be explained by fraud alone. It required collusion or coercion. "You must hear what I have," deduced Samarco, burst first. "We know who." Brogan pushed the suspension. She planted doubt. She wants to stall the project. Brogan gave him the smile of a cat watching a dog bark at a window. "Nonsense," I advised Prudence. "It was your recklessness that forced a countermeasure." Miss Vale asked me directly what exposure she risked. I answered, "Both of you, silence," Wolfe said. And they did, which tells you about the force in his voice. "Hart, you were present at the notaries. You managed the papers. Explain why both letters came before Miss Quinn in sequence." Hart didn't flinch. He leaned slightly toward Wolfe, voice calm. "Miss Vale instructed me to prepare both versions." She wanted options. We brought both to Miss Quinn. She signed each, then left it to me which to forward. I advised suspension. That is all. Charlotte Vale turned sharply to him. "Mr. Hart, I did no such thing." "You did," he said evenly. "Perhaps you don't recall?" "It was a hectic day. You were tired, but you told me, 'Prepare 2. Let me see them side by side.' I complied." Her hand tightened on her bag. I would never delegate such a choice. Wolfe lifted his lids half an inch. "Miss Vale, did you in fact speak those words?" "No," she said firmly. "I remember uncertainty, yes. I remember Eliza pressing legal risk, but I never authorized 2 contradictory letters. Never." Hart spread his palms, smooth as glass. "She has forgotten." "It happens. Pfui," Wolfe said, with finality that made the room colder. "Miss Vale has not forgotten. She has been made to doubt herself. That is the design." He tapped the blotter where the anonymous card still waited. "Someone reinforced that doubt with this, an instruction to choose the second signature." "Miss Vale, which letter bore the second?" "The suspension," she whispered. "Precisely. Whoever left the card wanted you to confirm the suspension order as genuine. That individual had to know the order of signatures." "Who knew?" Wolfe turned his eyes, heavy as anchors, on Hart. Hart didn't move. but Samarco leaned forward eagerly. You see, he orchestrated it. He slipped the card. No, Wolfe cut him off. Hart did not personally slip it. He employed a conduit, a butler named René, neighbor's servant, whom he paid through a rendezvous 2 nights prior. René has admitted as much. The description matched Hart's glasses, his coat. Hart, do you deny it? For the first time, Hart's composure cracked at the edge, a tick near his jaw. I deny, he said flatly. This is fabrication. Fabrication, Wolfe repeated. Then you will not mind if I summon René to repeat his story in your presence, or if I subpoena the building's records of his employer's account, where the sudden appearance of $200 coincides. Hart pressed his lips shut. Silence lengthened. Vale's eyes, sharp now, pinned him. Brogan interjected quickly. Even if Hart acted, what's the motive? He gains nothing. Wolfe swiveled slightly, his voice dropping into the rhythm of deduction. He gains control. Miss Vale. Hart has long been your filter, your handler. He manages your calendar, your papers, your engagements. By inducing contradiction, he undermines your certainty. Then, when you waver, he steps forward with guidance, his guidance. Eventually the board will see you as erratic, unfit. Who then manages the foundation? Not Samarco, not Brogan. Hart, installed quietly as caretaker, effective master. The silence after that was so complete, you could hear Fritz in the kitchen 30 feet away, shifting pans. Charlotte Vale's lips parted, then closed, then parted again. She turned to Hart. Is this true? Hart sat rigid. I've always acted for your best interest, he said stiffly. I've devoted my career to ensuring the foundation's stability. If you cannot see that, enough, she snapped, her first sharp word all morning. Wolfe raised a hand. Miss Vale, caution. Hart's loyalty is genuine, to the foundation, not to you. He sought to preserve it by preparing the ground for your eclipse. Brogan's advisement was sincere, if self-interested. Samarco's ambition is real, but not criminal. The orchestrator of the card, the dual signatures, the contrived confusion, it is Hart. Samarco exhaled in triumph. Brogan shook her head. Hart looked at Vale as if appealing to a jury of one. She, in turn, looked at Wolfe. What do I do? She asked softly. You reclaim authority, Wolfe said. Instruct Mr. Attridge now, on the telephone, which letter governs. You dictate a new order, unambiguous. You then dismiss Mr. Hart from further control of your documents, if you value clarity. If you prefer to indulge his guardianship, you will soon lose not only clarity, but command. She sat straighter. Then I dismiss him. Hart rose abruptly. This is a mistake. You will regret. Sit, Wolfe commanded, and the word had weight. Hart froze, then lowered himself, pale. I dialed Mr. Attridge, handed Vale the receiver. She spoke firmly, release of funds as originally intended. He acknowledged. When she hung up, her hand was steady. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing. There. The disruption is contained, the trespass remedied. Miss Vale, you will leave the card with me. I have use for it as a reminder of folly. Mr. Goodwin will see you out. She rose, shoulders lighter. Brogan followed with cool dignity, Samarco buzzing with vindication. Hart lingered until I nudged him toward the hall. When the door shut behind them, Wolfe opened his eyes. Archie, he said, we will dine early tonight. Exposure is exhausting, and Hart? I asked. He is finished. Not by police, but by consequence. That is sufficient, I grinned. Case closed? For the moment, Wolfe said, and reached for his beer. Until another letter arrives with 3 signatures. The brownstone had settled into one of those rare silences that makes you wonder if the city outside forgot to breathe. Wolfe was at his desk with the evening edition spread like a quilt over his lap, beer in reach, eyes closed but not asleep. I had poured myself coffee and was considering whether to risk a crack about his waistline when the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Charlotte Vale returning for another round or Samarco demanding applause. It was Saul Panzer, and Saul doesn't show up at our door without reason. He came in with his usual economy of movement, placed his hat on my desk and said, "I thought you'd want this quick." Wolfe opened his eyes, which is his equivalent of standing at attention. Saul sat without invitation. "I stayed on Hart," he said. After leaving here, he didn't go home. He didn't return to Vale's apartment either. He went downtown near City Hall, met a man in a small cafe, corner table, dark glasses, heavy coat. They spoke 15 minutes. Hart passed him an envelope. Wolfe grunted, "You're certain?" "Certain. I couldn't see contents, but the handoff was deliberate." After that, Hart walked out alone, caught a cab. The man stayed behind and made a call from the payphone. Describe him. Tall, pale, thinning hair, expensive suit that didn't match the cafe. Manner of someone used to being obeyed. I frowned. That doesn't sound like a common errand boy. Who is he? Saul shrugged. Didn't recognize him. But the cafe is frequented by city officials. Could be government, could be lobbyist. That got Wolfe's eyes narrowing. So Hart had an accomplice. His motive extends beyond personal ambition. He serves another hand, I asked. Which means what? We nailed Hart. He's out. Isn't that enough? No, Wolfe said heavily. Hart is not cunning enough to devise this labyrinth. He was steward, not architect. His accomplice, this man, engineered the stratagem to discredit Miss Vale. The question is, why? Saul slid a folded sheet from his pocket. I tailed the man after. He went into the offices of Latham and Brooke, a lobbying firm with ties to state contracts. Nameplate identified him as Raymond Driscoll. Wolfe's brows climbed. Driscoll? Yes, he represents the rival institute, the one that would benefit if Vale's project collapsed. Then we're not finished, I said. Indeed not, Wolfe agreed. Miss Vale is still imperiled. With Hart exposed, Driscoll may move more overtly. He will not accept defeat quietly. Saul nodded once. Do you want me to dig further? Yes. Establish Driscoll's communications with the board of the Vale Foundation, if any, and ascertain whether he has influence with the press. Wolfe shifted in his chair. This has not concluded. It has merely shed its skin, Saul, departed as quietly as he came, leaving behind a thicker air than he found. I perched on the edge of my desk. So what's the play, boss? You already gave Vale her confidence back. Do we tell her about Driscoll and let her swing the axe? No, Wolfe said, eyes closing again. We keep our hand until we know whose blood stains the blade. If Driscoll has infiltrated the board, exposure must be timed. Premature disclosure could fracture her support further. It was the kind of patience he demanded that made me itch. I lit a cigarette and paced, which is my form of indoor gardening. So tomorrow we wait. Tomorrow, Wolfe murmured. We listen. The next morning began with a phone call at 9, unusual enough in itself. Charlotte Vale's voice came down the line, controlled but tight. Mr. Wolfe, someone has spoken to the press. There's an article in the Chronicle. Vale in conflict, philanthropist issues, contradictory orders. They imply confusion, instability. The board is calling for an emergency meeting this afternoon. I told her to hold steady and patched her through to Wolfe. He listened, then said, You will attend the meeting. Say nothing decisive. I will send Mr. Goodwin. He will observe, she objected, lightly but not long. Wolfe has a way of making commands sound like inevitabilities. At 1 o'clock I was in the Foundation's boardroom, where men in suits and women in pearls had gathered with the air of vultures politely waiting for the body to cool. The Chronicle lay on the table, folded open to the damning headline. Attridge, calm but grim, sat near the center. Driscoll wasn't there, but his shadow might as well have been. The chairman cleared his throat. We must consider whether Miss Vale's recent contradictions impair her judgment. Confidence in leadership is paramount. I kept my mouth shut and my ears wide. What I heard was a mix of doubt and hesitation. Some directors defended her record, others fretted about reputational risk. It was the kind of setting where one more nudge could topple the balance. Miss Vale held her composure, though I could see the tremor in her hand when she lifted her glass. She didn't deny the contradiction. She simply said it was being clarified. That wasn't enough for some. When the meeting adjourned, I caught Attridge in the hall. He lowered his voice. Someone wants her removed. This leak was calculated by Driscoll, I said. He looked at me. Sharp. You know this? Know enough to smell it, I said. Wolfe will confirm the rest. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had Saul's fresh report. Driscoll had been in contact with 2 board members, subtle but direct, pushing the idea that Miss Vale was unfit. One of those members had ties to the rival institute. Wolfe sat very still, fingers steepled. So, Driscoll employs Hart, manipulates signatures, leaks to the press, agitates the board. His aim is removal of Miss Vale and substitution of leadership pliable to him. The pattern is complete. And how do you break it? I asked. By turning his own design against him. We will summon them again, not only Hart, Brogan, and Samarco, but Driscoll himself. Here, in this office. Let them face my deductions, and each other. The web will not hold under light. I sighed. Another gathering. You'll run out of chairs. Then stand, Wolfe said, reaching for the bell to summon Fritz, but ensure the chairs are polished. Civilization must endure, even when fools conspire. It was set. Tomorrow the brownstone would host not 3 but 4 suspects, each with their motives, their secrets, and their ambitions. Wolfe had the pattern. Now he wanted the confession. And I had the uneasy feeling that when Driscoll arrived, the game would turn sharper than any of us liked. The next day began with an air thick enough to chew. Fritz moved through the kitchen like a man aware of coming weather, and Wolfe stayed in the plant rooms longer than usual, as if orchids were less tiresome than the human tangle he'd invited. I had the office set up by noon, chairs placed to keep elbows apart and tempers on display. Wolfe wanted Driscoll here with the others, and I had arranged it with a call that left him too curious to refuse. At 1 o'clock sharp, Charlotte Vale arrived again, Hart trailing her like a shadow he hadn't realized was unwanted. She didn't acknowledge him, which made the temperature drop by 10 degrees. Samarco came after, eyes bright with indignation he hadn't yet spent. Brogan followed, brisk, guarded, her portfolio clutched like a shield. And finally Driscoll entered, tall and composed, the type of man who walks into any room believing it is rented for his use. He wore the dark glasses even indoors, removing them only after Wolfe gestured with the faintest flick of his hand. Wolfe wasted no time. You are all here because the matter remains unresolved. Contradictions have been planted. Confidence has been threatened. Now we will strip away artifice. Driscoll smiled faintly. Mr. Wolfe, I was told you had information concerning Miss Vale's position. I did not expect a symposium. You will find no symposium here, Wolfe said, his tone as heavy as stone. You will find inquiry. He turned his gaze on Hart. You, sir, facilitated the dual signatures. You manipulated sequence and reinforced it with a clandestine message delivered by proxy. That is established. Your denial has no merit. Hart opened his mouth, closed it, and stared straight ahead. Wolfe shifted to Samarco. You, in your ambition, pressed for release without sufficient diligence. You are reckless, but not malicious. Your influence was transparent, not covert. Samarco flushed, but there was a trace of relief under it. Then Brogan, you advised suspension. Your counsel was self-interested, aligning with clients beyond this foundation, but your advice was not fraudulent. It was exploited. Brogan stiffened. I offered prudence. If it was twisted, I resent it. Resent, then, Wolfe said without sympathy. Finally, his eyes fell on Driscoll, who had settled into his chair like a man immune to verdicts. And you are the architect. You employed Hart to erode Miss Vale's authority, arranged for contradiction, ensured its notarization, and leaked the matter to the press. Your purpose, to destabilize her stewardship, remove her, and leave the foundation vulnerable to capture by interests you serve. The room stiffened. Vale inhaled sharply. Samarco muttered something unprintable, and Brogan's lips pressed thin. Driscoll did not blink. That is a bold accusation, he said smoothly. Do you have proof? Proof enough, Wolfe rumbled. Panzer observed your meeting with Hart. The butler, René, identified your description. The board members you courted confirm your whispering campaign. Circumstance aligns too precisely to be coincidence. Driscoll leaned forward, unruffled. And what will you do with this circumstance? The Chronicle has already printed her instability. The board is already doubting. You cannot erase that with a speech in this parlor. Wolfe's lids lowered. No. But I can restore balance. Miss Vale, you must understand. The trap was not merely to contradict you. It was to make you doubt yourself, to make you uncertain in front of others. Driscoll cannot profit if you refuse to yield the posture of confusion. Vale's chin lifted. She looked at Driscoll squarely. You attempted to use my own hand against me. You tried to fracture my certainty. You failed. The board will hear from me directly tonight, and they will hear that I acted under sabotage, not senility. Driscoll's smile tightened. You underestimate how swiftly doubt spreads. And you underestimate how swiftly lawyers sue, Brogan cut in suddenly, her tone sharp as a blade. If it is revealed you conspired to undermine a foundation for the benefit of your client, Driscoll, you face disbarment and more. That was unexpected, and Driscoll's eyes flicked to her briefly. Samarco seized the moment. And I will testify. I saw the pressure, the timing, the manipulation. The tide had shifted, and Wolfe allowed it to swell. He opened his eyes wide enough to glint. You see, Driscoll, you are undone not by my words, but by theirs. You built a lattice of deception, but its beams were men and women with egos. They will not hold your weight. Driscoll stood abruptly. This is theater. You cannot prove in court what you claim here. Wolfe remained immobile. Court is irrelevant. Your strength was secrecy. Now your name is attached. Tomorrow's Chronicle will carry not only Miss Vale's rebuttal, but the revelation of your role. You will find that exposure is less forgiving than litigation. For the first time, Driscoll's control faltered. His hand trembled on the back of the chair. He adjusted his coat, placed his glasses on, and without further word, left the room. The door closed with a softness that belied the fury it carried. Hart followed him a moment later, not dismissed, but dissolved, like a man whose tether had snapped. Silence lingered until Vale spoke. Mr. Wolfe, you have given me back my ground. I will address the board. They may doubt, but they will not remove me without resistance. Wolfe inclined his head. So long as you do not doubt yourself, they cannot. Samarco muttered his thanks and withdrew. Brogan with a curt nod. Vale lingered, touched Wolfe's desk with her gloved hand as though anchoring herself, then departed with dignity intact. When the door shut behind her, Wolfe exhaled heavily. Archie, he said, have Fritz prepare dinner early. Tonight I shall require quantity. Quantity of what? I asked. Meat, he said simply. Exposure is lean fare. I must balance it. I leaned back, lighting a cigarette. And Driscoll? He is finished, Wolfe said. Not in prison, perhaps, but in influence. The board will recoil. His name will carry the stench of meddling. That suffices outside. The city kept breathing, but slower now, like it too had been waiting for Wolfe's word. The brownstone had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet Wolfe likes best. When the chairs are back in place, the voices are out the door, and only the smell of Fritz's kitchen lingers. Wolfe was in his chair, beer glass half full, eyes shut like shutters on a house that knows the storm past. I was thinking we'd earned the lull when the phone rang. It was Charlotte Vale. Her voice carried the tautness of someone trying not to snap. Mr. Goodwin, the board met tonight. I gave my statement firmly, as advised. They did not remove me, but afterward I received another note. Slipped under my door again, that pried Wolfe's eyes open when I relayed it. He reached out a hand, and I handed him the receiver. Miss Vale, he said, his tone so even it could iron shirts. Read it aloud. She did. Your strength will not protect you. Step down, or more signatures will follow. There was silence. Wolfe finally exhaled through his nose. More signatures. Pfui. The threat is crude, but it implies preparation. Someone retains access to your handwriting. That should concern you. I am already concerned, she said. But I will not resign. Good. Then allow me to manage the nuisance. Leave the note in your desk. Lock your door. And Miss Vale, you will not walk your corridors alone. She agreed. He hung up. I said, so Driscoll hasn't given up. Obviously not, Wolfe muttered. A man who trades in influence does not vanish in one afternoon. He attempts again, hoping intimidation will succeed where subterfuge failed. This latest message, however, was sloppily executed. He grows desperate. Or he has someone else still feeding him, I said. Heart's out, but Heart wasn't the only hand near her papers. Wolfe's gaze flicked to me, heavy-lidded but sharp. Correct. Someone inside remains obliging him. We must uncover who. And swiftly. The next morning, Saul reported that Renee had not been approached again. That meant Driscoll had found another courier. Saul also mentioned that a junior assistant at the foundation, name of Lydia Crane, was seen meeting Driscoll in a side cafe near Bryant Park. She worked under Samico, but handled clerical overflow for multiple executives. I went down to see her. She was young, mid-20s, the kind of bright-eyed type who thinks a job at a foundation makes her part of the nobility. When I introduced myself, she froze like she'd swallowed an ice cube whole. Miss Crane, I said, you've been talking to Driscoll. Her denial was fast, which is always clumsy. I only met him once. He asked about our programs, said he was a consultant. Consultants usually carry business cards, not envelopes, I told her. What did he pay you to carry? Her eyes darted. Nothing important. Drafts, summaries. Drafts that left Miss Vale looking unstable. Notes that told her to doubt herself. Miss Crane, if you think Driscoll will protect you, you should see how quickly he left Hart to hang. She paled, gripping the edge of her desk. I didn't know it would hurt her. He said it was routine, clarifications for the board. He gave me exact phrases to type, phrases like step down and second signature. She swallowed. Yes, that was enough. I left her shaking and brought the confession to Wolfe. He listened without triumph. So, Driscoll has multiple conduits. He disperses tasks so no single accomplice holds the whole picture. A clever method. But now that girl's tongue will wag if pressed. We must use her at the right moment. Expose her now, I asked. No. Preserve her for corroboration. First, we must cut Driscoll off entirely. He thought a moment, then nodded. Archie, call Mr. Attridge. Tell him to convene the board in emergency again, this time at Miss Vale's residence. Say I have evidence to present. We will corner Driscoll before his allies. That night, the gathering moved to Vale's penthouse at the Pierre. Security was doubled. I made sure René was stationed in plain sight with 2 guards behind him, as much warning as protection. The board assembled in her parlor, restless, murmuring about scandal and stability. Driscoll arrived late, as if to prove he owned the clock. Wolfe didn't rise from his armchair. Vale had loaned him her largest, but the room bent toward him anyway. He began without preface. "Ladies and gentlemen, you doubt Miss Vale's competence because contradictions have been thrust upon her. I say to you, those contradictions were manufactured." He laid out the evidence: Hart's sequence games, René's card delivery, the Chronicle leak, and finally Miss Crane's confession of phrases dictated by Driscoll himself. I backed it with dates, Saul with surveillance. It was neat, maybe too neat, but Driscoll's face began to sweat under its polish. He rose, tried to sneer it off. "This is absurd. The word of a frightened secretary? The suspicions of a hired sleuth?" Vale cut him off. "It is enough. You trespassed on my authority, Mr. Driscoll. You sowed doubt with my own signature. I will not allow it again," the board murmured, shifting like a tide. Attridge, steady as a stone, spoke. "I believe Miss Vale. And I believe Driscoll's influence here ends tonight." The vote was informal, but unanimous enough. Driscoll gathered his coat with venom in his eyes, but he didn't fight. He left, and the door clicked shut behind him. Wolfe drank water with the air of a man sipping vintage brandy. "It is done," he said. "Miss Vale, you may now proceed without sabotage. But remember, it was never your signatures that endangered you. It was your trust." She bowed her head slightly. "I will remember." Later, back at the brownstone, I asked Wolfe if he thought Driscoll would try again. "No," he said. "Exposure has stripped him. He thrives in shadows. Light has undone him, and Vale. She will survive," he said, eyes closing. Whether wisely I cannot say, but Survive Fritz brought in a platter of lamb, and Wolfe smiled faintly. "Archie, pour the beer. Tonight we restore appetite." Folly is exhausting, I poured, and the brownstone once more returned to its rhythm. The outside world's intrigues shut out, while Wolfe feasted on lamb, and I wondered how many more signatures fate had left in the city's drawer. The lamb had vanished from Fritz's platter. Wolfe was comfortably rounded, and I was halfway through a cigarette when the phone rang again. At that hour, it could only mean fresh trouble. I picked it up, and sure enough, it was Charlotte Vale. Her voice was steady, but steadiness like that is usually built on a lot of tremor underneath. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you may tell Mr. Wolfe that I appreciate his efforts. The board has quieted, and Driscoll's name is no longer uttered without derision. But I have discovered something troubling. While reviewing older files, I found another letter with my signature. It authorizes a transfer I have no memory of approving that got Wolfe's eyes open immediately." He gestured for the receiver, and I passed it. "Explain," he said. "It is dated 3 months ago," she said. "A smaller transfer, but to an account I do not recognize. The signature is mine, but again it is not mine. I fear the manipulation began earlier than we realized. Do not tamper with it further," Wolfe instructed. "Deliver it here tomorrow morning. Bring no one." She agreed. He hung up, and for once Wolfe did not immediately close his eyes. He sat thinking, lips pressed so firmly together you could have used them to seal wax. "Archie," he said finally, "we have been mistaken. We believed Driscoll's interference recent and opportunistic. But if a forged or coerced signature exists months before, the plot has deeper roots. Driscoll may not have been originator. He may have attached himself to a structure already built." That was the sort of remark that made me regret finishing my cigarette early. "Then who's the builder?" "We will know tomorrow," he said. The next morning Miss Vale arrived, punctual and alone. She carried a folder which she handed across Wolfe's desk as if it were radioactive. Inside was a 2-page instruction, neat as any of the others, directing the transfer of $200,000 to a holding account registered in Delaware. The signature was hers, yet Wolfe examined it with his magnifying glass and shook his head. "The slope of the V is different," he murmured. "The hesitation at the E. This was not your hand. Yet the notary's seal appears again. Marla Quinn." That made me sit forward. So Quinn has been notarizing contradictions longer than we thought. Vale looked stunned. "But she is respectable, meticulous." "Respectable, yes," Wolfe said. "Meticulous, perhaps too much. I must consider whether she is dupe or accomplice. Archie, you will fetch her here at 3 this afternoon. Tell her it is routine inquiry. Do not alarm her." I went, and Quinn came. She looked brisk as always, but when Wolfe set the older letter before her, the color drained a notch from her face. "Yes," she said after a pause. "I notarized this." Miss Vale was present. She signed. Vale leaned forward. "I did not." Quinn swallowed. "She did." She thanked me. As always, Wolfe's gaze bore into her like augers. "Describe the circumstances." It was late in the day. She arrived with Hart. He presented the document. She signed. I watched Vale's hands clenched. "I have no memory of this." "Because it did not occur," Wolfe said flatly. "Miss Quinn, you witnessed not Miss Vale but an impostor. Or you lied. Which?" Her composure wavered. "It was her," she insisted, though softer now. "Perhaps she was tired." "No," Wolfe thundered. "Tiredness does not alter signatures so completely. And you, madam, notarized at least 2 contradictions without raising alarm. Either you are incompetent, which I doubt, or you are complicit." She trembled. Mr. Hart assured me." "Ah." Wolfe leaned back, eyes narrowing. "So Hart arranged it. He brought a woman resembling Miss Vale, coached her, and you, complacent, attached your seal." I added, "And later, he brought the real Miss Vale with different documents so the trail would look consistent." Wolfe nodded. "Precisely. Miss Quinn, you will remain silent of this meeting. If you speak, you will face charges. But if you cooperate henceforth, you may escape disgrace. Do you understand?" She nodded, pale. When she left, Wolfe let out a long breath. So, Hart's scheme was even bolder. He not only manipulated sequence, he manufactured acts entirely, substituting another hand for Miss Vale's. That is how the rot began months ago. Driscoll merely capitalized upon it. Later, Vale pressed her palms to her temples. Then my foundation's integrity has been compromised beyond repair. "Not beyond repair," Wolfe corrected, "but you must excise thoroughly. Hart must be confronted with this deception and the impostor identified." "Only then will the board's faith be restored," she asked, almost pleading. "Can it be done?" Wolfe shut his eyes, which meant yes, though not easily. "It can. But it will require patience. Archie, summon Hart here tomorrow morning. Tell him it is his opportunity to redeem himself. We shall provide him rope enough to fashion his own noose." After she departed, I said, "You're playing close." "What if he refuses?" "He will not," Wolfe murmured. "Ambitious men rarely refuse a stage. And tomorrow, Archie, we shall learn who impersonated Charlotte Vale, and why." The brownstone felt heavier that evening, as though the orchids upstairs had scented the tension. Wolfe sipped his beer in silence, and I let the quiet stand. Somewhere in the city, Hart was rehearsing whatever lie he thought would save him, not knowing Wolfe had already prepared the line that would hang him. Hart came at 10 the next morning, punctual as a court summons. He entered the office with the look of a man who thinks his necktie might shield him from bullets. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He sat behind his desk like a fortress that had been waiting centuries for this siege. I guided Hart to the red leather chair opposite. He sat without protest, though his eyes darted at the blotter where Wolfe had laid out the older forged letter in plain view. "You know why you're here," Wolfe began, his voice as unhurried as a glacier. "You contrived to weaken Miss Vale's authority." "We have established that much, but yesterday a deeper deceit emerged. A forged directive, notarized under false pretense, 3 months ago. That deception bears your design." Speak Hart's jaw worked. "I don't know what you mean." "Miss Vale signed that document." "I was present." "No," Wolfe said. "You were present with a woman resembling her." Miss Quinn testified. She admitted complacency. "The signature proves it. The hand is not Vale's. You found someone to impersonate her." Hart's face tightened, but he clung to his denial. "You're mistaken." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "Do not waste my digestion with lies. Your ambition is evident. What is not yet clear is your confederate's role. Who impersonated Miss Vale?" Name her. Hart's lips pressed thin. Silence stretching. I leaned forward. "You're cornered, Hart. Driscoll's gone. Quinn has already cracked. If you think you can stonewall Wolfe, you don't know him. He'll keep pressing until you wish you'd talked earlier." Hart's eyes flicked to me, then back to Wolfe. "Even if what you say were true," he said carefully, "no crime occurred. The funds were transferred properly. The foundation suffered no loss." "You are wrong," Wolfe said softly, which was worse than shouting. "The loss is credibility. The moment Miss Vale appeared inconsistent, her control faltered. That was the goal, was it not? To pave the way for her removal, Hart shifted in his seat, his composure slipping. "She's been unfit for years," he burst. "Indecisive, sentimental. The foundation needed structure. I provided it, and for that," Wolfe said, "you brought in an impostor to mimic her hand and tricked a notary into sanctioning it. You prolonged the charade with contradictory orders, and then, with Driscoll, you leaked her instability to the press. You sought not merely to manage her affairs, but to replace her." Hart leaned back, sweat rising along his collar. "She would have ruined the foundation. I acted for its survival." "No," Wolfe corrected. "You acted for possession." "The impostor, Hart. Who was she?" He hesitated, then gave a bitter laugh. "Why should I tell you?" "Because," Wolfe said, "if you do not, I will ensure Miss Quinn reveals every detail of her encounter, and the police will drag you before a magistrate. Your reputation, your employability, your future, all gone. But if you confess now, here, and name her, Miss Vale may yet deal with you privately, sparing you public disgrace." That did it. Hart's shoulders sagged. His voice dropped. "It was Lydia Crane. The assistant. She resembles Vale faintly, enough to fool Quinn at a glance. With makeup, with Hart's coaching, yes, it was possible. She practiced the signature dozens of times. I supervised, I exhaled. So that's why she was meeting Driscoll. She was deeper in than she admitted." Wolfe's eyes glinted. "Indeed. And thus the chain completes. Hart conceived, Driscoll exploited, Quinn complied, and Crane executed. A sordid but efficient quadrille." Hart's voice sharpened. "Don't pin it all on me. Driscoll pushed from the beginning. He wanted Miss Vale undermined. He supplied resources. I simply managed." "You simply betrayed," Wolfe said. His words were flat stone. "You will now depart, Hart. You will resign your position immediately. You will not attempt to sway Miss Vale again. If you do, this evidence will find its way to the district attorney, and your career will end in court." Hart rose, pale, trembling, but he nodded. "I'll go. I'll leave the foundation." His voice was bitter, cracked. "But when she collapses, without me, don't pretend you saved her." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "She will stand without you." When Hart left, the air seemed lighter. Wolfe leaned back, pressing his fingertips together. Archie, telephone Miss Vale. Tell her the impostor has been unmasked. Tell her she must dismiss both Hart and the girl at once. If she delays, the rot will remain, I called, and when I relayed the news, her silence stretched long enough to make me think the line had gone dead. Then she said, very quietly, I trusted him. I trusted them all, not anymore, I told her. Wolfe's drawn the map. Follow it, she promised she would. That evening, with the house returned to its rhythm, Wolfe finally allowed himself a sigh of satisfaction. It is concluded, he said. The contriver exposed, the accomplices named, the client steadied. Justice, Archie, is not always the courts. Sometimes it is simply the restoration of order. I leaned back, lighting another cigarette. Order, huh? For most people, that's just straightening the silverware. For you, it's toppling a conspiracy. Wolfe allowed the faintest twitch of his mouth. Silverware, conspiracy, both must be in their proper place. He reached for his beer. I watched him drink, and for once, the brownstone felt unshaken. The case of the letter with 2 signatures had ended, not with handcuffs, but with exposure. And if you ask me, that's Wolfe's favorite kind of ending, the kind where the world has to sit up straighter because he said so. Miss Vale came 3 days later, not as a supplicant, but as a woman reclaiming her ground. She entered the office with a poise she hadn't carried before and sat across from Wolfe without hesitation. Hart was gone. Lydia Crane had been dismissed with a quiet settlement, and Quinn had resigned under the weight of her own conscience. Driscoll's name was now associated with scandal and whispers, his influence shrunken like a coat left out in the rain. She laid a check on Wolfe's desk, balance of his fee, written with a steady hand. Mr. Wolfe, she said, you have not only salvaged my reputation, but revealed how precarious it truly was. I will be more vigilant and less charitable with those who presume to steer me. Wolfe inclined his head, the acknowledgement of a general to a sovereign. You are not weak, Miss Vale. You are deceived. There is no shame in that, only lesson. Strength lies not in trust, but in discernment. She smiled faintly. And perhaps in employing the right detective? Perhaps, Wolfe allowed. When she left, the brownstone settled again into its natural state, the sound of Fritz in the kitchen and Theodore's careful steps above. Wolfe reached for his beer with the satisfaction of a man who had returned order to a world briefly disarranged. I leaned back in my chair. So the moral is don't sign anything unless Wolfe's looking over your shoulder? The moral, Wolfe said, eyes half closed, is that the gravest theft is not of money but of certainty. Restore certainty and you restore power. Miss Vale has it again. That suffices. Dinner that evening was lamb again, with Fritz's herb sauce, and Wolfe consumed it in silence until the last bite was gone. He leaned back, wiped his lips, and gave the closest thing he ever gives to benediction. Archie, man's appetite for deception is boundless. But so, fortunately, is his appetite for justice, which, coming from him, was as close as you'll get to poetry. I lit a cigarette, raised my cup of coffee, and figured that in our line of work, restoring certainty one case at a time wasn't a bad way to spend a life, and in Wolfe's line of work, it was the only way.